Thank you. I'm going to make kind of 3 points, which I hope will be related. And in a way, all of them maybe are useless to make because in a way they deal with a proposed bill which is now defunct, and I don't know if it will be on the table again. So maybe we are just making a theoretical discussion. But and I think there's extensive ethical and legal analysis of the bill and criticism. So I'm not going to go into that. It was just to mention from the Special Rapporteur on Health and Torture together, from UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health and Torture, from the Israel Medical Association, from Physicians for Human Rights together with Adala, from the ICRC, from the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, from the Bioethics Committee, from the Israel Medical Association. All of those provided detailed ethical and legal critiques of the law, so you can all read that. What I do want to say is just to refer mostly to this argument that we heard, and again, it's about the proposed law, not necessarily about current practice, from Professor Bar-Ilan and Dr. Goldstein about the issue of health. And I think to me it should be pretty, I think that we should really emphasize that I don't think the proposed law is about health, because the issue of health is treated in another law, the Patients' Rights Law, and this was analyzed extensively, and there is a very good analysis from the Israel Democracy Institute that emphasizes that when it comes to health, the Patients' Rights Law requires 5 cumulative conditions to force treatment. There has to be an approval of the ethics committee. There has to be extreme risk to the person. He has to be given information, even if he eventually refuses it. But he has to give given the same information you would give for informed consent. It is expected that the medical treatment will extensively improve the situation. And very important, number 5, there is reasonable basis to presume that after being given the treatment, he will retroactively be happy about it and will agree to it. And that does not actually allow, and I think that the whole, if the issue is health, we have ethical and legal criteria which are sufficient in the Patients' Rights Law. And it's very clear that the reasons given in the proposed law, like state security and public order, which are actually, I never see those, which are proxy for political consideration, because they always are, it shows that here we are talking about the law with a political purpose, and I don't think you have to be very, savvy to understand and to the context, who proposed when, etc. And I think that, and here I agree with the position taken by the different organizations I mentioned, also the ICRC and others, that the standard of medical ethics and medical law should continue to apply. And here actually the proposed bill was going to subordinate the medical and ethical consideration to the political consideration framed as security considerations. And there was very interesting discussion during the whole debate about the bill, and actually one of the persons wrote interesting. It was not published like in a newspaper or anything, but it was in a very public mailing list, so I think it can be quoted. Dr. Maya Peredraz wrote very extensively and interestingly about the work of the ethics committee, how there's a lot of mediation that is done, how actually the issue is dealt with in daily life, maybe to some extent in the way that Dr. Goldstein mentioned, but without going to this extreme of forced feeding, which would not be allowed under the current law, and how actually indeed most hunger strikers, many of them take some liquid or sugar or salt, and it varies, and they reach with consent with the doctors, which they gain the trust, the decision about what kind of food will they take or not. They indeed usually don't want to die, and all of that is done, and some of them actually said to the doctors based on trust that they don't want to fast in reality, and all of it can be done based on this trust that is done under the Patients' Rights Bill and the Ethics Committee, and the proposed law going to a court and not to the Ethics Committee was going to disrupt and destroy this trust. So if we care about the prisoner's health and life, actually we should oppose the proposed bill. And actually it's interesting that no one died in Israel from hunger strike, but there were, people forgot to mention it, I think 5 cases of Palestinian prisoners who died during cases of forced feeding. In different times in the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s. So actually, if we care about the health, we should actually object to the forced feeding, which has health risks, and the current mechanism actually allows to deal with those issues successfully. So this is the first point. Second point I want to make is that if we don't see here regard for health, what do we see? And we see use of what we can call biopower to control the political action and the life of Palestinians. And here I want to compare it to something from a different context, which is a question of the closure on Gaza and the role of food in that story. And as we know, during the siege on Gaza, the quantities of goods to be allowed into Gaza were determined or are determined using a breathing room formula developed by the Israeli army to calculate the number of days remaining until the supply of any given product runs out in Gaza. And there were two types of thresholds, the upper warning line and the lower warning line. The upper warning line, which identified surpluses, was defined as an inventory exceeding 21 days for products with a short shelf life and 80 days for those for a long shelf life. And the lower warning line identified shortages and was defined as an inventory of less than 4 days for products with a short shelf life and less than 20 days for products with a long shelf life. I thought to write the formulas on the board, but I don't want to take time on that. And if supplies dropped below the determined threshold, there was a set of procedures in place to ensure entry of the product into Gaza. And also there was a policy of deliberate reduction of the supply of basic goods into Gaza, and there was a famous red line document which summarized work conducted by security authorities in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, analyzing the regular food consumption of Gaza Strip residents. And the document presented calculations made by the Ministry of Health, determining the number of calories and quantities of various basic food items in Gaza that Gaza residents require to subsist by age and gender. And the figures, in turn, were used to calculate the number of trucks needed daily and the details of the contents to meet this consumption level, taking into account local production of vegetable products and dairy and meat products. Now, although the army claimed this was simply a draft document that was never used, the quantities calculated and presented therein correspond precisely with the quotas set for imported goods at the relevant time period. In fact, in the early stages of the closure, immediately after Hamas taken control of the Strip, even fewer quantities of goods were cleared for entry into Gaza than what was allowed for under the Red Line document. And the calculation made in the Red Line documents led to the conclusion that 106 trucks transporting food from Israel 5 days a week would be necessary to supply Gaza's residents with a daily humanitarian portion required to survive. So why am I telling all of the story? Because I think we see here two different stories, but related, of biopower, we can call it. One of them is a policy to maybe decrease food, and the other is a policy to maybe increase food, but both of them are to maintain the population on, what first Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food called, and then Adi Ophir wrote about it quite a lot, on the verge, Adi Ophir talked about on the verge of humanitarian disaster. In this case, we want to prevent starvation. We don't want the prisoners to starve to death, because that will look bad for us. We don't want the people in Gaza to starve to death, because that will look bad and reflect badly. But we do want them to have just enough food to survive. So I think we have here, in both cases, we want to prevent a disaster. In one case, it is by policy, again, to decrease food security. In the other, to give food, maybe when you don't want to eat it. But I think there's something here that we can see together, how this kind of exercise, you talked about the power of life and death here, but here biopower in the occupation, a specific occupation context where the autonomy is even denied more, and there are also the occupation and colonial and racial relationship taking place. So that's, I think, a context that we have to think about this law. We have to think about this law in this context. And the third, last point I want to say is that in 2003, the Israeli Supreme Court actually held that feeding forcibly by putting a tube is illegal, except it held it regarding geese, when you wanted to feed them forcibly for the production of foie gras, saying that allowing it will stand against the animal welfare law. Now, in both cases, we're talking about inserting a tube to the and forced feeding. Of course, there are many differences. We can say in one case, those geese will eventually be killed. In another, it is supposedly to save life, although I contest that. I think that part of the argument I try to make that we hear that if we're talking about saving lives, the mechanism within the patient's right bill deal with that, and the proposed bill was not about saving life. Actually, it was about risking life, as previous cases of death of forced feed Palestinians showed. But the comparison also shows us that how do we ask questions about autonomy and how we are talking, and why do you think, why would those proposing this bill saying this would be legitimate, what has been prohibited regarding gays, and how maybe there is here a wish to deny autonomy and to do certain practices we actually, even when concerning animals, are considered illegal. So that's my 3 points. Thank you.